The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
There it is. For the first time in American history, the Speaker of the U.S. House has been removed. Kevin McCarthy, this is breaking within the last half hour, lost the position by a vote of 216 to 210. This effort was driven by a group of far-right conservatives led by Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. So now the question is, how can the Republican Party come together? Will Democrats get on board with any effort to approve a new Speaker of the House? This situation really is unprecedented.
The House is in recess right now as we watch what happens next. Joining us live to break it all down is North Central College professor Stephen Caliendo. Professor, thanks for being with us. So essentially, the House and Senate are handcuffed right now until we get a new speaker, and who knows how long that's going to take.
Well, it's a little bit different than what we had in January when we had to have 15 votes to get the first speaker, because that was a brand new Congress and they couldn't even organize themselves to do anything without a speaker. This is different now that the speakership is vacated. There was a list of names that Kevin McCarthy needed to submit to the House parliamentarian upon his election in January in a particular order. And so there will be a speaker pro tem. There will be somebody who steps into that role so government can't continue to function. But my guess is they won't let it go very long. They want to try to get a permanent speaker in place.
What does this say to you, Professor Caliendo, of the state of the Republican Party?
I don't know so much that it's about the state of the Republican Party, except for the fact that it's a very divided country generally. It's a very slim majority for Republicans. We knew that going in. Remember, it took Speaker McCarthy more than a dozen ballots, I think 15 ballots, to win in the first place. There's about a half dozen Republicans that are really causing this trouble. I don't know that they're particularly serious people. They're saying that it's about ideology, but I think they're also fundraising on it and using it to boost their social media presence. And so when you have that slim of a majority, and part of the deal was you only took one person to get a motion to vacate on the floor, this is what we're left with.
I think there are a lot of Americans out there who feel let down by this move because there are so many issues on the table right now. We're dealing with soaring inflation. Many people can't afford food. They can't afford gas. We have a migrant crisis that's knocking on Chicago's front door. And so now we have to wait for a new speaker to be appointed, to be voted on. And like I said earlier, who knows how long this is going to take? So this is really a cog in the wheel of democracy. I think a lot of people see it that way.
That's right, and there's a handful of people, and have been for the last 5 or 6 years, who pride themselves of being cogs in the wheel for democracy. They're not really solving problems. They're creating more problems. And, that's their right to do that. The question is whether or not they should be doing it. And so we'll wait to see. Things can happen. The problem is we only have 42 days now, I think, until the next government shutdown, because they only passed the temporary spending bill last weekend. And so they really need to get together all the issues that you mentioned, Natalie, but in addition to that, make sure the government continues to be funded after the middle of November.
And does this derail with regard to all those issues that Natalie just brought up, along with the looming second shutdown, Professor Caliendo? How much is this going to hurt the House's ability to actually do their jobs?
Yeah, it definitely hurts because deals are going to have to be made. I mean, again, it's not so much what happened today as much as that this is a continuation of the long story that started in January when we realized how slim the majority was going to be. And so there's going to have to be deals made. Democrats, none of them voted to save the speaker today. He would have certainly had to make assurances to some folks before to get them to do that. But Leader Jeffries asked them not to do that. So we'll see what happens now. There'll have to be a new vote for speaker. My guess is McCarthy will put himself back up. And then can he get a coalition together that might include Democrats to allow him to become speaker?
I'm sorry, that last bit you mentioned there, I was going to inquire as to the possibility. Is there any possibility that Kevin McCarthy gets reinstalled to that spot?
Absolutely. Of course. Yes, he can run again. There's nothing that prohibits him from doing that. I think he demonstrated back in January that he certainly has a persistent mentality. And so my guess is that he would put his name back forward. The other thing is that I can't think of anybody off the top of my head who there would be more of a consensus for. I mean, there's a lot of support for Speaker McCarthy among Republicans. There's only 8 of them, or 6 of them actually in this particular vote, who decided to vote to oust him. So it's not that it's a widespread problem. It's just a very slim majority.
Does this help or hurt Republicans heading into the presidential election?
Natalie, it's an excellent question. It does make the party look to be in disarray, and that's probably a little bit problematic for them. I don't know that it has much of effect on the presidential election, but of course, as you're suggesting, I think they have to try to hold on to their majority after the elections next November, and that might make this more difficult as at a local level. When people go to vote for their members of the House, they may seek to punish folks who weren't even able to get things done when they had a majority.
Professor Caliendo, how do you see the next, let's just talk about the immediate short term here, the next few days, the next few weeks, and then the longer term in terms of getting back to House business and what is going to unfold on the House floor in the coming days and weeks? How do you see that playing out?
Well, in the coming minutes or hours, we'll find out who the Speaker pro tem is going to be, and then we'll find out whether that Speaker will decide to call an election for a permanent Speaker very quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to have the first votes for that tonight. There's certainly work to be done if there are people who are lined up to run. I think the question is if it's McCarthy, who could he get in line in the next couple of hours to support him again that he wasn't willing to or able to get in line to stop this from happening within the hour? And so it'll be an interesting evening in that respect.
I want to go back in history. I'm a history buff. I love it, especially with politics. Let's talk about 1910 and what unfolded then and how that relates to what's going on today.
Well, Natalie, you were there. You remember, of course.
Oh, yes.
10 when Speaker Cannon actually pulled the vote himself. In other words, he made the motion to vacate his own speakership because he wanted to put his opponents on record of having to support him or not support him. And he survived, of course, that speakership and has now a major legislative building named for him in Washington, D.C. And so I don't know whether Speaker McCarthy will have the same fate, but it's the first time ever in our history that the speakership was vacated.
We really appreciate your perspective on this breaking news situation this afternoon. Professor Caliendo, thank you, sir.
It's great to see you both.
Thank you.